Well, hello everyone. So I'm sitting here this morning thinking, what kind of video do I want to do? I was so close to doing just a general kind of Q&A discussion about End of Dragon, some of the stuff that I'm excited about. And then I saw this comment, a suggestion for a tier list, which was kind of a big thing when we did the previous Q&A, that I love. The idea of doing a tier list for the whole franchise, the ultimate Guild Wars 2 review through the ages. Where do we generally rate each of the products? So that's the idea that I've got for today. I just saw this and it completely gripped me. So let's see what we've got. I've kind of made my own tier list for this one because it's going to be a bit easier in Google Sheets. And yeah, let's run through, see what we got. Okay, so to be clear here, the idea is I'm doing all the big boxes, so like Prophecies, like Nightfall, like Guild Wars 2 Core. And then when we get to Guild Wars 2, I also want to do Living World seasons on their own. So, for example, I've constructed this box, Season 1, which I do think that, you know, it kind of deserves its own place. It's not really of the same quality of an expansion, and it's not even really the same, like, dev turnaround necessarily, but the amount of years and months of development that were dedicated to periods of time like that, I think is worth something. So, and besides, if we don't include those, Guild Wars 2 basically is just going to be Core, Heart of Thorns, POF. That's it as of now, which is kind of mind-blowing for a game hitting its decade soonish. But, yeah, so that's the idea, and since I'm including those, I figure as well, Guild Wars 1 probably deserves its extra box, which is Guild Wars Beyond. So that's the Warring Cry, Hearts of the North, Winds of Change, all rolled in together. That's basically Guild Wars 1's Living World. So let's do it. And I guess I'll go chronological. I'll go release timeline. So that starts us off with Prophecies. So where do we put Prophecies? Here's a funny thing about Prophecies. I think everyone in general rates Prophecies way too high. Oh, I can't move the boxes around in the spreadsheet. Fine. I think people rate Prophecies way too high because, it's like where the franchise started. I think most people overrate and overestimate just how much lore actually is contained there, how much world building is actually contained there. It's a lot more thin on the ground than I think most people realize. The other thing that's a lot kind of wonkier about this game than I think most people realize is the story's not told that well either. You know, you do get voice acted cutscenes and you do kind of get like a nice idea of a main story with missions and so on. The gameplay involved was obviously great, but it's not like the characters were very emotive. It's not like there's really much characterization going on among the people that we meet. And also, just in terms of like how the plot is structured, it's basically, I've always described it like this. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you'll know this. It's basically an excuse for a world tour. That's how I describe Prophecies. It's, oh, we're here, now this has happened, so go run to this new region. Now this has happened, so go run to this new region. Now this has happened, so go run to this new region, just over and over and over again. And it's very transparent when you're playing. They do kind of weave it together quite nicely, I think, around the Kryta stuff with the Shining Blade and so on. I think where it's at its best, actually, is when you're in the Crystal Desert and you get to the Shiver Peaks, but then there's like one final moment where, oh, we're off to the Fire Island chain now. It did do a lot for the setting, and I do admire some of the decisions they made. I actually think that the world building is quite an interesting place right before Guild Wars 1. But Prophecies isn't the be-all and end-all, guys. Not really. So, where do we put it ultimately? I think I'm going to put Prophecies down at C. Oh yeah, for my own tier, I've added an E tier as well here. I've added an E. And we might not fill in an E, I don't know. We'll see how much that's being utilized. So that's where we start. Prophecies. Next, we have Factions. So this is obviously on everyone's mind at the moment with End of Dragons coming out. This is the introduction of Cantha. This is the story of the Affliction and the Plague. Now, I actually think there was a lot of really good stuff that happened with Factions in terms of the world building, in terms of the story. They had a very coherent idea. They even did some fun, like, rug pull things, like a moment where we all die and then come back to life. Something that was sort of honoured by POF many years later, right? A sort of thing, or alluded, well, an allusion to? I don't know, an homage, let's say. Anyway, I think they did pretty good with the enemies that you find. I think the environments we go to were incredibly exotic. You know, the Jade Sea and the Echo Vale Forest are easy things to think about first of all. But even just like the city was brilliant. And it was a breath of fresh air to have like this East Asian aesthetic that original Guild Wars basically had very, very, very little of. I think they went really hard with that stuff. Where Factions loses points for me is... I mean, it had the amazing trailer as well. I mean, Christ, the best trailer that's ever existed for any Guild Wars product at all was the Factions one, clearly. The place that it falls down is actually in gameplay for me. Now, what I'm about to say is probably, like, sacrilege to most Guild Wars fans, but I never liked the instant rush to level 20. Like, you beat the tutorial zone and you're 20 instantly. I never liked what felt like hundreds of maps. It obviously wasn't hundreds of maps, but every map and every mission just swarming, heaving to the brim with tons of enemies. I don't think the gameplay was actually that entertaining as far as the PvE is concerned. It was basically just the same process of avoid patrols, target monks first, target bosses second, and that's it. And C space your way through the game, or tab space your way through the game. Take target, attack. One thing I will say, from my personal experience with factions, is I did get to factions a bit late. Like, I had been playing during Prophecies, but then I kind of took a break from the game. And then when I got to factions, I didn't play it on release, right? So I don't really have any of those social experiences that people talked about. I also wasn't like into the competitive stuff at the time. So my personal ranking of factions is quite high because of the setting. I think the setting's fantastic, but it's not as high as it otherwise could have been. Overall, and here's the other thing, it was smaller. Now, back when I was playing the game, I didn't like that the world map felt smaller or something. I don't know. I felt like I much preferred the way that Prophecy slowly flowed us up to max level through a lot of its story. I can understand now as an adult looking back why they made the decisions they did with factions. It's hard. Maybe they were about on par. What one did, the other did poorly, and vice versa, maybe? Because I just love how expansive Prophecies is. Maybe it's nostalgia, I'm not sure, but I think I'm going to pull factions down just because it's about on par in my estimation, in my memory. Let's put it that way. Okay, next we have Nightfall. Oh boy, Nightfall. Well, I think you guys know what I'm going to say here. I'm going to put Nightfall in S tier. Well, okay, maybe you won't anticipate this. Nightfall to me is the most cohesive, brilliant thing that they ever made. I think what had happened was they'd learnt a bunch of lessons in Prophecies. About like the gameplay that their game was offering and a little bit about the world building. They learned a ton about setting and story delivery in factions, and they learned what it's like to swing the pendulum in the other direction in terms of progression being too fast. And then they hit us with Nightfall. Nightfall is the best expression of Guild Wars 1. Yeah, it's a little bit bloated with the hero system, so if you're a totally new player, you've got like loads of professions to learn all at once, and it's a bit of a nightmare, right? That's a definite downside to Nightfall. The rest of it, though, is seamless and incredible. They gradually level you up. The story's a lot meatier. It's a brilliant story that tied the plots of the previous games in together with just that perfect balance of like kind of military grittiness, but also like mysticism and magic. It ends in this incredibly exotic location out in the mist, which was this fantastic idea. It had like a mount type thing with the Janundu. All the rewards and stuff as you go ahead, like, are actually filtered in an interesting pace. Like, you slowly, it's not just, oh, there's a bunch of expensive armor. It's like, okay, this next region has slightly more expensive armor, and then the next has even more, slightly more expensive, and so on and so on. They had like these little moments in the story where you break away to actually like gain rank, like Sunspear rank or Lightbringer rank and stuff. And I know some people were a little bit sneery about that, but I liked that in Nightfall, it wasn't just a relentless progression down a corridor, so to speak, just along the main questline. There'd be these specific moments where you would stop and you'd fan out. You'd build a base of operations like the Sunspear Sanctuary or whatever, and you'd go and do a bunch of side quests and you'd explore more of what they have to offer. I think the skill capturing was brilliant. They had all those side features like hunting for chests and stuff. Nightfall was really, really good. And, you know, people complain about Cormier as a character stealing the limelight, blah, blah, blah. I think the fact that people complain about Cormier is a testament to just how strong the characters had become in Guild Wars, that you could actually now feel riled up about someone taking your reward or whatever, that they'd actually taken those steps forward. You'd never really feel that about a bunch of the Prophecies characters because they were hardly on screen. They were basically cardboard cutouts. Now we were getting to real gameplay, real story, real exciting stuff. The greatest crime of Nightfall was that it came out, I think, probably too fast after Factions. Honestly, it blows my mind how quickly they made Nightfall. Nightfall is apex Guild Wars 1, and it deserves an S spot just for that, even years later when we mostly think about Guild Wars 2. Speaking of which, we'll be running on very soon. Finally, we have Eye of the North. Now, I'm a big fan of Eye of the North. Eye of the North, though I had been playing Guild Wars during all these periods, I was still like kind of a bit of a casual player, you know. I was wont to quit every now and then. For example, at Nightfall, right near the end of the story, I actually ended up quitting the damn thing because I couldn't get through the Gate of Madness mission. But when Eye of the North came out, when it was the build-up for a Guild Wars 2, a proper MMO to speak, we always used to use the phrase open world MMO, which, you know, isn't really a great phrase, but when it felt like it was building to that, there was something so magical and captivating about Eye of the North. They really did a lot graphically and on the technical level with Eye of the North, with how they presented their environments, like the burning forest and stuff, and all the hallucinogenic stuff, and just the cool, crazy environments you'd find in the Tarnished Coast with the floating rocks, all the fantastic magic behind the depths of Tyria. Eye of the North really had like that special something. It was a small experience, but then they lent into like more standard like PvE and gamey things. Like I remember the Guild Wars 1 community hated like the rep tracks. Like you could have progress with the Asura, or you could have progress with the Char, and it would actually increase the potency of your skills and stuff. But I loved all that stuff. I loved the PvE skills. I loved the rank. I loved what they did with the dungeons and, gathering diamonds and so on. I thought Eye of the North was brilliant, and just so captivated by the idea that there was going to be this incredible new game coming up, and the stuff I would do in it would actually allow me to take through. I don't know whether you think it's unfair, dear listener, that I rate Eye of the North up for these reasons, but I really do. I'm going to say that Eye of the North is A. This was a magical, brilliant time in the game's history for me, and this is the period that really made me a huge Guild Wars fan. This is when I was big into the PvP stuff. This is when I was big into properly learning the story, which I'd only sort of glanced over before. This is what inspired me to even come here to YouTube a couple of years later. So, yeah, Eye of the North, super high for me. Next we have Guild Wars Beyond. It's funny with my Winds of Change discussion recently. Someone said that they thought the Winds of Change within Guild Wars Beyond is the best story they ever told. I think it's the most mature tonally and the most sophisticated in terms of like discussing societies and stuff kind of story they've ever told. But at the end of the day, this is Guild Wars Living World. There again was a lot of magic to the Warring Krita sections. I remember when that lab appeared. Was it Zin's lab? Was it Zin in there? Or was it Blim in there? But experimenting on the Seer, and you could go to the edge of the map and you could see it in the background. I remember all the mysterious stuff and how it evolved beautifully. The Warring Krita was fantastic. Hearts of the North was a bit of a step down. Winds of Change was the best gameplay they ever did. But at the end of the day, this wasn't a full expansion, not really. It's actually a lot closer to Living World Season 1 than I think from Guild Wars 2 than I think people give it credit for. So actually, I'm going to put it down here. In fact, let's swap it with factions. And let's do it this way. I think that's probably, well, no, I can't swap it with factions. No. All right, after much back and forthing here, I'll edit all that out. I'm putting it at C. I was really close to putting it to D. I don't think it's D. It did a lot to build into Guild Wars 2 hype. I quite respect how few devs they had working on that and just like the passion behind it and how much content they got in there. And how well they knew the game. So there is a lot I like about Guild Wars Beyond. Guild Wars Beyond doesn't really represent squandered potential either. When I think about like what we're going to rate with Guild Wars 2 and where they might get like, I think that comes into it more. So I think I'm going to say Guild Wars Beyond is the bottom of C. So that's kind of how I view it all so far. Next, we have Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 launch. Wow, I mean, so here's the thing. What Guild Wars 2 launch catapulted this franchise to new heights. Those of us who were in this franchise before Guild Wars 2's like manifesto trailer and stuff, it was much smaller and it exploded. It was the king of the world for a while. Now, do we credit Guild Wars 2 with that purely and just say, look, it's clearly S tier because it was like the ultimate MMO for its day or whatever? Or was what people loved the idea of Guild Wars 2 and the reality never matched it, which is why we never stayed on top of the world? In which case, do you actually credit it as S tier? That's a very cynical kind of downer of a take, I suppose. I think Guild Wars 2 did some things very, very, very well. To just look at the product itself, it obviously fell short of its lofty ambitions with the personal story, but it's a reasonably well-told story. It obviously fell short of its ambitions with the dungeons, and there's not really a caveat there. I think they just kind of dropped the ball completely as far as endgame's concerned in those early times. And it kind of dropped the ball in terms of itemization of exotics and so on. I think they actually hit a good balance with legendaries though. Legendaries carried the way for a good like half a year, 3/4 of a year after launch. So, it was a massive game. It was an incredibly high quality, well-polished game with decent build craft. In many ways, it's still absolutely the best MMO experience you can get if those are some of your priorities. So, was it as good as Eye of the North? I think it certainly was. I think it's going to be the bottom of A at least. If only because it didn't quite have the magic of I mean, in terms of just pure product, I can't do that. Look, Eye of the North is lower than Guild Wars 2. It has to be. It has to be. Guild Wars 2 is the top of A. They had a lot of kinks. It's like Prophecies again, It's a really good... It's clearly way, way, way better than Prophecies. Oh, man, I kind of want to rank everything slightly differently now. I kind of want to put Prophecies down to D, because comparing Prophecies to Guild Wars 2 launch is just crazy. This is just such an empty nothing of a product. So let's do it this way, okay? Prophecies goes down, Guild Wars 2 goes up, Factions is here, Guild Wars Beyond. Yeah, no, I think this is good, actually. I think Prophecies deserves to be in D. How did Prophecies end up in C? There you go. So, yeah, Guild Wars 2, Either North, beautiful. I really like this. So yeah, then we get into Season 1. So I can tell you already, I think Season 1, if we're going to have to fill E and S, I think Season 1 comes down to E for me. Season 1 is when Guild Wars was at, the whole franchise was at its, if not now, because there's basically no content coming in, alright? And they've managed to hide and pave over that quite well with the big replay. If it's not this year, then it was Season 1. So Season 1 basically gets the low rating because I believe it was squandered potential. Because I think that if they nailed these early patches, all the value from Guild Wars 2, they would have stayed on the King of the World. If this had been very clear, like even with South Sun, that we were still dealing with stories people cared about, and they were addressing the big ticket items, and that's basically dungeons and endgame and stuff like that balance. That's where most people were disgruntled. If it started looking at the roleplay community as well, which was quite strong at this time, but has been absolutely unsupported and is basically gone in Guild Wars at this point to a large degree. I think Season 1 is sort of to blame for a lot of those problems. Yeah, Season 1 did at least go for some guild stuff, or was that during Season 2 that finally that came in? But then never supported it too much later. It was just very waffly, just sort of feeling their way, and I don't think it was good enough. So yeah, there's some gems in there. In fact, the last tier list I did was on Season 1. If you guys, after this video, want to check it out, and you'll see I speak very positively about some of those patches. But as a whole, this was a real damage to the franchise. There needed to be as well, for what it's worth, confirmation of an expansion straight away. They were hiding from us the idea that they even wanted to do an expansion. I think they were just too big and too ambitious and too crazy at this time. And who can blame them? It took them balls to, you know, shake the cage like they did with Guild Wars 2. But I think they kept shaking when they really should have stopped around Season 1, and they should have figured out what they were doing. So, yeah, I rate it down, honestly. I'm pretty gloomy about it. All right, next we get Season 2. I think Season 2... Season 2 I actually remember being very excited about. I really love the way that they filtered Dry Top out. I really love the way that they integrated the Silver Waste. I love the way that the Pact came back into the story. I love the way that they segued into an expansion, and we actually kind of got a sense that that's what they were properly doing. I think they told some cool stories that the community had been speculating about, with like the Sylvari and so on as well. I think there were even some good cutscenes. The cast of characters weren't too lovable. Not really at this time, I must be honest. But it was okay. Now, where Season 2 loses out is it was really quite short. For the amount of time... And I remember they had like their idea of their release cadence, and then like one of the releases got cut in half, and then they went on a big break, and you could really feel the crunch that was going on there. And then obviously it ended, and we just had to wait and wait and wait for Heart of Thorns. Now you could say that's Heart of Thorns' fault, or you could say that's Season 2, but these are all things that kind of drag it down for me a bit. Now as far as what you can actually play, I do think Season 2 was good, but not better than Prophecies. So I actually think I'm going to put it to D. It's a little bit more of these lingering feelings of... Season 1. You know, when I'm doing all my Final Fantasy coverage lately, I get all these people coming into my chat and saying, hey, WP, I haven't watched you for years. I quit Guild Wars 2 years ago. And I'll say, oh, yeah, when did you quit? And invariably, they're all saying around before Heart of Thorns. And that's these two boxes. And I do think it was pretty rough for Guild Wars around that time. You know, even though I had a lot of sincere enthusiasm and optimism, I think a lot of other people didn't. And, yeah, you know, I'm kind of... The factors I consider with each of these boxes are all over the place, but it is honestly what just strikes to my mind when I think about these. Next, we have Heart of Thorns. I think Heart of Thorns was a brilliant expansion. It was definitely a better product than Factions. Is it in the B tier? I think given the long-lasting metas and so on, I think I'll put Heart of Thorns up here in B as well, actually. Seriously. I think it's very easy to forget how fun and magical Heart of Thorns was when you didn't have the masteries. Now, I know a lot of people in the community had a problem with the combat tuning, and I know a lot of people found the mastery gates grindy. I didn't. In fact, I was very, like, grumpy about that for a long time, because I specifically went into Heart of Thorns without using boosters. I remember everyone talking about using boosters and stuff to get in there. I remember I did a video like saying, here's how you can prep for Heart of Thorns, and I showed off that boosters were a thing and fireworks and stuff, but I said, look, I'm not going to do that Or was that for Path of Fire I did that video? Anyway, I didn't do it. I just played at a normal standard pace. Now, for me, for the amount I enjoy the game, and I appreciate it, I'm like a hyper enthusiast. It was very, very well balanced for me. If anything, actually, I thought they came in a bit quick. I mean, that was my honest opinion. And I just kind of looked at the world and how angry everyone was at the Mastery Gates and scratched my head. So that's a controversy I didn't care about. The hero challenges requiring you to, oh dear, play with other people in an MMO, be sociable. I actually thought that was fine. None of these were problems to me. And the meta events and getting Deus Ex Machina, was it? The achievement for getting all the machined weapons and stuff, the amount of time I spent in those metas, I had so much fun. I think the environments were fantastic, not just because of how Mastery's mapped with them, but just remember that first experience of going to Auric Basin? The soundtracks were great, the metas in general were brilliant. Dragon's Stand I think is a bit poorly balanced, but generally speaking, I love Heart of Thorns. I think it's really good. Didn't quite have the magic of Heart of Thorns, and it was a lot smaller, and it did miss out on a lot of major story beats. We kind of got ruined on like a lot of Foul Lane stuff and the Malik stuff and so on and so on and so on. And it was a disappointment to me to realize that, you know, Guild Wars 1 boxes were like Nightfall and like factions, whole new continents to go to, and this was just a jungle. It was a high quality jungle, but it was just a jungle. So it doesn't get to these upper heights here. But I do rate it very highly, and certainly over Factions and Prophecies, just because these were kind of very primordial and kind of loose. So yeah, I think it's the top of B, certainly. Not that we have anything else in B. Okay, Season 3. Season 3, I'm just going to immediately put here, I'm pretty confident about this. Season 3 was not as amazing as Heart of Thorns. But then again, how would it be? They're not really selling it to you as a box. But this was when Guild Wars was at a really good place. They had a real sense of what they were doing. They were actually working on another expansion. And they had regular, high-quality content on a consistent release schedule. This is like the golden era for the whole franchise to me, Season 3. And it's kind of partly this and partly because of Path of Fire 2. Season 3 was great. Now, again, it did have some problems. The story itself was really wishy-washy, and it's kind of a bit of that Prophecies vibe, like throwing you all over the place, you know? And I don't think, ultimately, the Lazarus is Balthazar thing has worked as a story. I think it was too messy. I think that Season 3, the first half, should have just been dealing with Heart of Thorns Fallout, and the second half should have been segueing into Balthazar, and they tried to do too much and made it way too complicated. I don't think they should have squeezed in any Massar, Crichton Civil War stuff. I would much have preferred if it was purely about Sylvari, Nightmare Core, ending Heart of Thorns, and all those stories about the war in Kryta were still on the table today, so that like the Isles of Janthea and all that stuff still mattered today. But this era also gave us raiding, which is the height of Guild Wars 2's PvE, if you're actually looking for progression and you're like hardcore about the PvE. This was the best era for that. My favorite like single instant story thing ever is Bastion of the Penitent. If I had the mini boxes, that would be S+++. So I think Season 3 was all round a fantastic time, a really good time to be a Guild Wars fan. And look, if Guild Wars wasn't growing as a game, and if regular MMO players weren't looking back at it at this time, I think that was some serious proof that Living World just as a format wasn't that great, because, I mean, look, they were putting out great stuff and people just weren't listening on a broader stage. So, then we move into Path of Fire. Path of Fire... Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put Eye of the North over. And I'm going to put Path of Fire here. Actually, I'm going to move Guild Wars 2 over. We're going to put Path of Fire. We're going to say, then it's Guild Wars 2. Then it's Eye of the North. And that's my A tier. That's my A tier. I love Path of Fire, and I'm serious. I love it more than Guild Wars 2. It's like the Nightfall thing again, and I know it's tempting to say it's the Nightfall thing because we're looking at the same kind of area of the world or whatever. In fact, hold on, where's my Nightfall box gone? Oh no, Nightfall's at S, yeah, of course. It's like the Nightfall thing again, where by the time they've got to Path of Fire, they've learned a lot of lessons from Core, they've learned a lot of lessons from Heart of Thorns, and now they've given us something brilliant. The mounts, I mean, what more is there to say? They're absolutely fantastic. But just the entire premise of the expansion, God versus King versus Dragon, I think is incredible. I think there was real diversity in the places we go to. You know, I hear the criticism sometimes it was just all desert. I don't see that. I see crazy fiery areas where the Forged were. I see some sand dune areas. I see some rocky mesa type areas. I see the Salt Flats is its own type of place. I see a frosty dwarven area. I see massive swathes of branded places. I see architecture change from Amnoon over to Varbi. As for the story itself, I mean, there were so many amazing beats. Right from that moment when you fly in on a moving airship with exploding pyramids around, I knew we were in for something. I think the Vlas story stuff worked well. I think the moment where Balthazar straight up slays us is incredible, and we kind of get a recap of everything so far. The final boss battle is brilliant. The Path of Fire is great, guys, and it falls down in community estimations because it didn't have the meta stuff from Heart of Thorns. So where Path of Fire failed was with itemization, with progression, with the idea of having a home and having good metas in those maps. And I think maybe the reason it fell off with that is because ArenaNet knew they were going straight into Season 4, so why did the expansion need the longevity, I guess they wondered? Or they were scared of splitting people out or whatever, but Path of Fire suffered on those grounds, and those grounds only. Now, this is one of the reasons I'm excited about End of Dragons, because hopefully it's learned the lessons from all three, and we will see. There is no End of Dragons equivalent on the Guild Wars scale. We just had Eye of the North, which was really just a mini thing to segue us into Guild Wars 2. So, who knows? End of Dragons might be the best of everything, but we'll see. I think Path of Fire is brilliant. I think it's underrated by players these days. Well worth a playthrough. You know what else I think is underrated? Season 4. Oh, God. So, it's not better than either. It's not better than these other three. Okay, we're going to put Season 4 at the top of B. Now, how do I justify that? Again, it has all the value and benefit of Season 3, but now we're in a world filled with mounts. Now they're doing more special things with, like, the game engine, like the moving boat in the Sandswept Isles, or you sail along on a skimmer and sharks jump out of the water, or dolphins jump out near you, or you do a story instance and you're in a moving ship again as you, like, I mean, Sandswept Isles is a brilliant, like, it's almost like an orgy of all the amazing new things that they could do with the engine, right? We had, though he wasn't on screen too much, some really good delivery when it came to Joko. The weakest release of this season was the corner release, but at least there we had some brilliant actual single player, I say, I mean, Jesus. We had some brilliant story instances as far as, you know, the Joko stuff's concerned, and the moving through Gandhara. Yeah, the city was a bit underwhelming and was nothing like what we'd seen in Nightfall, but still, that was like the lowlights of it. I think all the stuff at Thunderhead is fantastic. I think the way they successfully told an Elder Dragon defeat story in the living world. And I really do think we got every fantasy you could possibly imagine out of that Kralkatorrik fight. What more could you want? Riding around on Arene, blasting him from the sky, going inside his mindscape, you know, meta events on the outside of his body, you know, the whole auditorium fight as well. And yeah, you know, people might not like the whole Aurene resurrection thing. I think it was really well telegraphed. I enjoyed it a lot. And just how it was actually technically delivered to us, with them culling the UI away and making us force walk as we stagger crippled through the corridors. I mean, this was really good. This was probably Guild Wars 2 storytelling at one of its heights. Unfortunately, again, I think in broader MMO communities, people weren't appreciating it. It wasn't clicking. Maybe people don't see what I see out of this season. So who knows? Now, let's get to a really weird box. Now, this is a box that I don't know how to view. This is the Icebrood saga. So I find this really hard, because the first half of the Icebrood saga, I unironically, seriously think was very good. I think Grothmar was a good release. A pretty decent open world map. It was a little bit smaller than I was expecting, coming out of the heights of Season 4, which was just incredible. But we were all very forgiving of it, because it had come out of the layoffs and so on, and we knew that they'd rushed for it or whatever. But it was still a good map. I still remember, like, the hidden stuff to get into the Order of Whispers base. The snow slowly filtering in as you leave the last moments of the story. And that big moment with Bangar. Now, Bangar, I think, is one of the best characters they've ever done. He's so captivating when he's on screen. All the cutscenes in the Icebrood saga were really good. You know, Icebrood Saga was announced to us with that brilliant trailer at the start, which I think, actually, they did manage to get to some of those heights with some of the in-engine cutscenes, too. And that continued even through Bura. Very dark, very creepy. The stuff with the whispers, everything even right up through Jakar. I was genuinely really enjoying, and, you know, I had my misgivings about it. We all did. We had our misgivings because ArenaNet was giving us this to us instead of an expansion, and we all felt wonky about the future of Guild Wars 2. And so it was all laced with this kind of weird, icky feel. But the first few patches were genuinely good. Then they do the U-turn, because they see how icky the whole thing feels. They do the U-turn, End of Dragons. And Icebrood Saga bears the brunt of that. Icebrood Saga is not good when it comes to everything that Champions offered. It's just not. So, where do I... you know, I've done enough ranting about it already. So, where do we rate it? It's like half good, half bad. I honestly think, I've got to be honest here, I think that the fact that 2 Elder Dragons were defeated in such a way, and it did have, you know, there were some other missteps about other stuff too, like including like what they did with Bram and the Spirits of the Wild, and we didn't even get full stories, and the dwarves are just randomly back but not properly explored, and the amount of doors it closed and did in a dissatisfying way, into what degree it sort of disrespected the subject material of the franchise, and that's a very strong word, but I really do actually mean it. I think I'm gonna put it. It's not as bad as Season 1. Season 1 was probably worse, for like, because there was a huge spotlight on Guild Wars, and that spotlight was squandered. But the Icebrood saga is pretty low. Like, okay, so let's phrase it this way. If I could, let's fix this as well. I'm sure this has been aggravating many of you the whole way through the video. If I could change any one of these boxes, I think what you're looking at is the order in reverse. So I wouldn't change. Nightfall is the last thing I'd change. I think Nightfall's brilliant. What's there to change about Nightfall? There's very little I'd change about Path of Fire. There's some things I'd change about Launch. There's some things I'd change about... Yeah, and so there you go. That's kind of... There you go. That's how the tier list works. I fumbled my way into that. And I would definitely change a lot about Season 1. And I would definitely change a lot about the Icebrood saga. Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good tier list there, I think. We do, of course, have one final box. That's End of Dragons. And I hope to God I would change very little about it, and I could put it up to S, or even beating Nightfall, which is, in truth, my estimation of the best the franchise has ever been. So there you have it, guys. That's a little tier list for you all today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think about the franchise in general. Do you think I've got some really wonky arguments? Now, I'm serious. The more comments and walls of text and fun discussion back and forth, and I mean, you can come at me on any of these opinions, you know, be respectful. But if you do that, I would love to do like a follow-up discussion on this, bouncing back and forth on your ideas. We could do a Q&A after this, which is ultimately what I was going to sit down and record this morning anyway. So there you have it. That is my honest review of all of Guild Wars ever, in tier list form. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Let me know what you think. I'll see you tomorrow. Yes, I mentioned it earlier. If you're interested, I did do a tier list on Season 1. If you didn't give it a shot because you think Season 1's boring, you might be surprised. There's a link on screen in the background now. See what you think.